evening, everybody. I want to first start off by thanking my wife, Bina, for her enthusiasm and commitment to help create this theme of the evening called Unity in the Community, as that is one of the main goals of our organization, Yibaneh. And it's lectures like this that Yibaneh organizes amongst other learning experiences and hands-on experience, tested, and you can find all about those different events on our website. I want to make a few special notes of thanks. First, to the Nitzanim congregation for allowing us to use their shul this evening. Binyamin Adler for the use of the sound system. Jeremy Rubin for sponsoring the video recording, so you can tell your friends and watch in case you miss something, which I'm sure you won't, but just in case. I also want to thank Benji Singer from Israel K for helping promote the event. He deserves a special thanks. And as a very special thanks to Ruthie Elbaum Schwartz for sponsoring and dedicating tonight's learning in memory of her father, Mark Elbaum, Meir Ben Avram Yitzhak, whose yahrzeit is today, and he should have an Aliyas Neshama. And especially on behalf of Yibaneh and this very distinguished crowd, we want to thank Rabbi Twerski for gracing us with his presence and giving us the opportunity to hear his pearls of wisdom from his vast life experience. He's well known as the founder and director of the Gateway Rehabilitation Center in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, a noted psychiatrist, and has written and published well over 70 books. One of Yibaneh's goal is to help create unity in the community. And we felt, by inviting Rabbi Twerski to speak, especially during the Omer, which is concept between the Pesach Seder and our approach to Sinai, was most fitting. At the Seder, we create these chaburot, we create groups. And of course, some of us worked harder than others, preparing, cleaning, getting rid of the chametz. And the chametz represents the negative traits, the yetzer hara, the evil inclination. Chazal teach us how to find, if you look at a kernel, how do you know if this has become chametz or not? So if it begins to split or crack, which is a sign, the opposite of togetherness. After the chabura of the Seder, the following day, the 16th, so we start to count the Omer. So we enter what Rav Noach Weinberg had described from the Mishnah, acquiring 48 ways of wisdom. Well, we know we're working on our character. This is about personal and character development. After the 49th evening, following, we stand as a united, indivisible, and eternal nation, just as Israel is supposed to be, as we're ready to witness the revelation and receive the supernal wisdom, which we call the Torah. With great anticipation and appreciation, here's Rabbi Twerski.
Good evening, thank you everyone. You know, one of my favorite sforim, and it should be everybody's favorite, is Mesilat Yesharim. And in addition to the fact that it is one of the greatest Sifrei Musar ever written, my attraction to Mesilat Yesharim is because he says in the introduction, I am not going to tell you anything in this Sefer that you don't already know. And the purpose of writing this Sefer is to reinforce and emphasize everything that you've already learned, everything that you already know. And so for me that is very meaningful. First of all, I don't think that anything new has been said in the last several hundred years. But I certainly do not say anything new. I repeat only that which I have gathered from various sources, and those sources are available to all of you, and so you have gathered the same things that I have. So as Ramchal says, I'm not going to tell you anything new. The idea of forming unity is of the greatest importance. So much so that the Medrash says that when Bnei Yisrael are united, Hashem is willing to forgive even Avodah Zarah. Now, that is an important statement. So I don't think there can be anything of greater importance than somehow contributing. Anybody can make a contribution in any way to increasing achdut, to increasing unity. One of the great tzaddikim said, when I was young and very ambitious and enthusiastic, I thought I could change the world. As I grew older, I realized that that's grandiose. No, I cannot change the world. But I should be able to change my country. And as I progressed and matured more, I realized that I can't change my country, but I should be able to change my community. And then I realized that even that's beyond my possibility. But I should be able to change my family. And now I realize I have a full-time job trying to change myself. So the idea of changing the community, bringing greater unity in the community is wonderful, but it's grandiose. But we can start, hopefully, with ourselves, and hopefully with our family, and with our immediate surroundings. As was said, we are in the period between Pesach and Shavuot, in the period of Sefirah to Omer. And of course, during the period of Sefirah, we observe certain levels of Avelut because of the tragic death of the thousands of students of Rabbi Akiva during this period of time. Which is rather strange because on either side you have these momentous occasions. Pesach, Zman Chilosenu, are coming into being as a nation. A period of great ecstasy and joy. And then the Shavuot, Matan Torah, right? The single most momentous occasion in the history of Judaism. And so these enormous two great occasions are bookends. In between there is a period of mourning. But I think if we could perhaps understand why this period of mourning, and as you know what the Gemara says, that the reason that Rabbi Akiva's students died during this period of time is because they did not relate to each other with proper respect. Now, students of Rabbi Akiva had to be the greatest Torah scholars. And yet, even their immense knowledge of Torah could not outweigh the offense that they did not respect each other properly. And I think that this is something we have to think about when we're talking about unity, which requires consideration and respect for one another, even if we differ. But let's take it to one side. The one side is the Yontif Pesach. Zman Chelusenu. What is Zman Chelusenu? It's an Independence Day. It's a national Yom HaAtzmaut, right? But that's not so. Because we know that how you celebrate a Yom HaAtzmaut. You have parades and picnics and fireworks and speeches, and then you go home and rest. Pesach is a little different. It's not one day, but it's 7 days. And for these 7 days, you have to prepare 2 weeks in advance. And the halachas of Pesach are extremely rigorous. Very, very strict 7 days. That's not how you celebrate an Independence Day. And the Torah tells us that we have to think about Yetzias Mitzrayim every day. It's a mitzvah to think about Yetziat Mitzrayim every day. And we do so. First of all, every Shabbos when we make Kiddush, Zecher Yetzias Mitzrayim. And during Birchat Hamazon, Al Shetzotzonu Me'eretz Mitzrayim. And when we put on tefillin in the morning, Zecher Yetzias Mitzrayim. And tzitzis and Zecher Yetzias Mitzrayim. You know, almost every mitzvah relates somehow to Yetzias Mitzrayim. Now, granted, Yetzias Mitzrayim was a singular event, and we came into being as a nation. But why do we have to talk about it every day, 3 times a day, 6 times a day? It's a little too much. So I never understood it properly. But one of the things that I was occupied with during my years of practice was treating addicts, addiction to alcohol, addiction to drugs. And one young man came to Pittsburgh to be treated for drugs, and he was a very severe drug addict, but Baruch Hashem, Baruch Hashem, he recovered. He lived in New York, and I knew if he goes back to New York and he meets up with his old friends, he's a goner. So I didn't let him go back to New York. I kept him in Pittsburgh for several months. Then one day he said to me, it's going to be Pesach, and I want to be at my father's Seder. That was a legitimate request. So he went to New York for Pesach. And he came back after Pesach and he said to me, when my father started saying the Haggadah, Avadim Hayinu, I interrupted him. And I said, Abba, can you say about yourself that you personally were ever an Eved? You say, Avadim Hayinu, your ancestors 3,000 years ago. But you don't know what it means to be an Eved. I can tell you what it means to be an Eved, he said. Because all those years that I was addicted to drugs, I was not a free person. I had no control of my life. I was an Eved to drugs. I did things in my life that I never thought I was capable of doing. But the reason I did them, the drug demanded it. And I was a slave to drugs. When he told me that, I got a new perspective on Yetzias Mitzrayim. Yes, you can be an Eved to Paroi. You can be an Eved to alcohol. You can be an Eved to drugs. You can be an Eved to food. You can be an Eved to gambling. You can be an Eved to anger. You can be an Eved to making money. You can be an Eved to going for kavod. Any time that you lose any control of any part of your life, right? You're an eved. And if we are sincere with ourselves, we'll realize that there are many areas of our life that we've lost control. And we behave because, no, that's who I am. I can't help it if I'm angry. I was born with a short fuse. And there are many areas of life in which people say, I can't help it, that's the way I am. And what Yetzias Mitzrayim tells us, and that's why we have to say it every day, right, is that you're never meant to be an eved. You're supposed to be a mechorim. You're supposed to be a free person. And you have to be able to break the chains of slavery. And it is not easy. It's much easier to get out of Para and Mitzrayim than to get out of the eved of losing control over oneself. There are marriages that have failed because people have lost control over themselves. That people are abusive and they can't seem to get over it. So Pesach, on the one hand, tells us about we have to become B'nai Chorim, and we have to learn how to be in control of ourselves and not react like animals do. You know, animals do not make choices because animals are slaves. You know, if an animal is hungry, it must look for food. Why? Because it has a drive for food, looking of hunger, and it must look for food. Well, what about if the animal were to decide, no, I'm going to fast today? An animal can't make that decision. It has no control over that. We can make decisions if we want to fast, for whatever reason, but animals cannot. And what happens is that if we lose control of ourselves, we lose part of our humanity. Because the distinction of a human being is that he's a creature who can make free choices. And if we give up that freedom and we accept an avdus, whether it's an avdus to alcohol, an avdus to drugs, an avdus to food, an avdus to sex, an avdus to gambling, we've given up part of our humanity. So I think that's what Pesach tells us. And then we come to Shavuot. What's the significance of Shavuot? Well, in the Amida and Shemon Esrei would say, Chag Shavuot Hazeh Zman Matan Toratenu. It's the time that the Torah was given to us. Where in Chumash does it say that Shavuot is Zman Matan Toratenu? Nowhere. The Torah does not refer to Shavuot as Zman Matan Toratenu. Interestingly enough, the Matan Toratenu is the single greatest event in our history. And the Torah describes Matan Torah, but it does not relate it to Shavuot. Well, what is Shavuot according to the Torah? Yom HaBikurim. The day that you bring Bikurim. The person has a field, an orchard, and has first ripened fruits. Then he brings the first ripened fruits to Bikurim to the Beit HaMikdash. And he recites the Vido Bikurim, where he says, I'm grateful to Hashem that has brought me to this land and given me this produce that I can enjoy. And he expresses his gratitude to Hashem. So what is Yom HaBikurim? It's a day of expressing gratitude. And what does the Torah tell us about Shavuot? Not that it's man matan Torah, but that it's the day of gratitude. There's no way around it. The Torah considers gratitude to be of greater importance than matan Torah. Now think of that. I mean, Bikurim is a fine mitzvah, but there's 248 other wonderful mitzvahs. And yet the Torah has chosen the mitzvah of Bikurim to designate it as the most significant event of Shavuot. Overrides in importance matan Torah. We come to no other conclusion other than the centrality of Yiddishkeit is developing proper midot, developing proper behavior, how we relate to other people. And therefore the Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva, even they were enormous Torah scholars, but because they were remiss in midot, in relating with proper midot to one another, they died during this period. You know, we see ourselves as Torah observant people. But yet we seem to make some choices about which mitzvahs are important and which not. Chumetz v'Pesach, chalila v'chalila. Of course, it's a kolat, it's a terrible avela. And to get proper matzot, there were tzaddikim that were very machmir on what kind of matzot they had. And there's the story of one of the tzaddikim who had set aside for himself special matzot for the Seder. A few days before Pesach, a poor man came to the house asking for some food to eat, and there was nothing else in the house to give him. So the wife found those matzot and she gave him the matzos. Later she realized that she had given him the special matzos that her husband had prepared for the Seder. So she went out and she got regular plain matzos, not with the great chashivut. And when she was terrified of telling it to him, what kind of terrible thing she had done. But ultimately she did tell him, and he didn't react at all. And he said, yes, Pesach, we have to be careful of a mashehu chometz. But we should even have to be more careful about a mashehu kas. A tiny bit of anger is worse than eating chometz. So, I don't have the matzos that I wanted, but I'm not going to lose my temper over that. How careful are we about losing our temper? There are things that irritate us, the things that provoke us. People provoke us, sometimes our own family provoke us, children provoke us. How careful are we not to go into chaos? And Reb Chaim Vital, the great successor to the Arizal, says, when the Talmud says that chaos is equivalent to avodah zorah, it does not mean that figuratively. Take it very literally. That losing one's temper and going into rage is equivalent to avodah zorah. No answers buts. And yet we can hear someone say about a person, oh, he's a great tzaddik. He's a fine Talmud Chacham, a wonderful Torah scholar. He does have a bad temper, though. And I say, he's not a fine tzaddik at all. Would you say he's a fine tzaddik? He's always a fine tzaddik, but he likes to eat chazer. If you eat chazer, you're not a fine tzaddik. And if you can go into rage, Moshe Rabbeinu, the greatest of all, the Torah doesn't hide it from us that several times he went into rage, and each time he made a mistake. So, Rabbi Chaim Vital says, makes an amazing statement in Shar HaKdusha. He says, yes, it is important how we observe all the mitzvahs, the positive mitzvahs, and the mitzvahs l'sasa. He says a person should be more careful about one's midot than even about the mitzvahs. And that's something that we often neglect. It's tragic to see people who believe that they're observant and they commit the sin of lo sisna es achicha bilvavecha. Do not carry hatred for your brother in your heart. Now the Torah gives us 3 degrees of how we should relate to someone who has offended us, to someone who has harmed us, to someone who has hurt us. The first thing a person wants to do is to get revenge. I'll get back at him. And the Mesilas Yesharim says that's the sweetest feeling in the world, is to be able to take revenge. But the Torah says you're not allowed to do it. He says maybe that's something that it can be expected only of a malach, but the Torah expects it of us. Not to take revenge. That's the first reaction. Then the next reaction is, no, I'm not going to take revenge on him. I mean, he did me something bad, he hurt me, but now he's asking me for a favor. So I'm not going to take revenge. So I'll do him what he's asking, but I'll say, you really don't deserve this because of what you did to me. But let me show you that I'm a nice guy, I'm a better person than you, and I'll help you. So he says, no way! You can't do that. That's holding a grudge. You're not allowed to do that. If he's asking you for a favor, you can do it, and keep silent. Okay. This says, Yesharim says, it takes the strength of a malach to do that, but we have to build up to do that. But what about the fact that I got a grudge against him? I can't stand the person. I hate him. And he did me some serious harm. And it says, lo sisna es achicha bilvavecha. Do not carry hatred. How do you get over that? A very difficult thing to get over that feeling. And so, what the Sforim say, and I wrote a little bit about this in a book called Forgiveness, is that the natural feeling, you're not going to take revenge, but maybe you want to say, someone who hurt you really badly, I just hope something terrible happens to him. Right? I said, no, you're not allowed to do that. And so what do we say in the Tefillah Kriyas Shema every night, or we should say it? Right? I forgive everyone. What do you mean I forgive everyone? How can I forgive? That's what I'm asking for. Don't punish anyone on my account. Right? Now maybe it's hard for me to forgive, but at least I should be able to ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu, don't punish anyone on my account. The great tzaddik Rabbi Yitzchak of Berditchev, when he was the Rov in Pinsk, had some very severe opposition. And one time when he's out of town, his opponents took his family and put them on the truck that was used to haul garbage and sent them out of town. And Rabbi Yitzchak's comrades, when they heard this about this outrageous act, they went to one of the great Talmidim, the Wolf of Zhytomyr, the great tzaddik, and they said, pray to the Rabbi Shalom, right, that he should punish these people for this terrible thing that they did to the Rav and his family. So they came to the Wolf, he said, I can't do anything because Rabbi Yitzchak is standing in front of the Oren Kodesh with a Tilim, praying to Hashem that he should forgive them and not hurt them at all. You know, there are things that we can only learn from learning from the lives of our tzaddikim. There was a Rav, Rabbi Yontiv Lippman in Kapulin, whose wife was humiliated by another woman in the town. And the town was very outraged about this, how the woman had insulted the Rebbetzin. And they wanted to take some punitive action. But the rule in the town was that you could not take any punitive action against someone without the permission of the Rav. So they told the Rav, they told the Rebbetzin, look, find an appropriate time when you can tell him what happened. And get his agreement that we should be able to take some disciplinary action. So Friday night was peaceful time, so she told him, look, I have something to tell you. She said, I was in the marketplace on Wednesday, and this woman publicly humiliated me. And the Rav said, that was on Wednesday? This is Friday night. You mean you've been walking around with a grudge and a resentment against her for 3 days? He says, we have to go ask Mechila. And that wasn't the response that she expected. But she accompanied the Rav to this woman's house. And when this woman saw the Rav at the Rebbetzin, he thought they came to curse her or whatever. And they said, no, I came to ask Mechila. I've been holding a resentment against you for several days. Right? And so the woman says, you're asking Mechila for me. I have to ask Mechila for you for having publicly insulted you. Right? And so they were mindful to each other and they embraced. Those are the midas that we learn from our tzaddikim. And there's stories that abound about the Chofetz Chaim, about the Rabbi Yisrael Salant, about many of the tzaddikim. And we're fortunate. One of the things that bothers me is that for so many centuries, nobody wrote down all the biographies of the tzaddikim. And finally we got wise to it, and in the last 100, 150 years, we have anecdotal stories about the behavior of tzaddikim, and we have to learn from them. So yes, if you want to build unity, and it's unity within the family, and unity within the neighborhood, and unity within friends, the thing to do is to develop our own midot. To get over the natural feelings that we have. The natural feelings that we have are animalistic feelings. Those are the feelings we were born with. And we're supposed to change. We were not meant to be animals. Science tells us a human being is a Homo sapiens. You know what Homo sapien means? It means a gorilla with intellect. We're not supposed to be intellectual animals. We're supposed to be mentioned. And mention means stop being a behemoth. Stop acting with your natural feelings. Start thinking about your behavior and be in charge of your behavior. That's what it means to be an Adam. That's what it means to be a mensch. Now if you think about it, you'll realize that when you go to a wedding and you hear the Sheva Brochus, There's two brachos that are Yotzer Ha'adam. Why? What's the message that we're giving to Chos and Kala? We're telling each one, you want a happy marriage? Right? Be a mensch. Get out of your skin. Stop thinking about yourself. Be considerate of the other person. What does the other person need? What does the other person want? That is Yotzer Ha'adam. That is why we talk about marriage as be a mensch, don't be a chaya. And so many of us are Homo sapiens. Right? We're intellectual, right? We're bright, we may even be Talmidei Chachamim, right? But we neglected to overcome some of our natural feelings, which is really what Avodas Hashem is all about. I had the opportunity to watch a marriage where there was consideration. When my father was in his 70s, he developed cancer of the pancreas with spread to the liver. And my father was very knowledgeable medically. And so he said to me, for cancer of the pancreas, chemotherapy doesn't accomplish anything, does it? So I said, no, it doesn't. He said, but chemotherapy can have some very unpleasant side effects. I said, right. He says, look, if the treatment is going to add to my life, going to prolong my life, then I have to take the side effects. But if it's not going to prolong my life, right, what's the purpose of taking a treatment that's going to cause me to be miserable and won't do me any good? I said, you're right. He says, okay, so we understand each other. No, we're not going to do chemotherapy. The doctor talks to my mother and says, unfortunately, there's not much we can do for the rabbi. But we can do chemotherapy. Maybe we can get an additional 3 months. And my mother says, 3 months? Why, for 3 days you have to do it. Every day of his life is precious. And so she came into my father's room, and she told him in no uncertain terms that he's going to take chemotherapy. After she left, my father said, I'm sorry that the doctor gave her the wrong information, because it's not going to add 3 months to my life. But you said, you know something? If I refuse the chemotherapy, then when I die, Ima will say, if only I had insisted, he would still be alive today. And she will feel guilty for not insisting. I don't want her to feel guilty. So I'll take the chemotherapy. There have been many things that I've done for Ima during our marriage. It's giving her one chance to do one last thing. That is consideration of another person's feelings. And that's what the Chachamim meant when they said the bracha under the chuppah. Say twice, Yotzer Ha'adam. Tell the chosn be a mensch and tell the kala be a mensch. Don't act like intellectual animals, but be considerate. And the same rule applies to all of us. In our marriage, in our relationship to friends, in our relationship to siblings. You know, the greatest tragedy that I've seen is when there's a break in the family and brothers and sisters don't talk to each other. I mean, I get calls sometimes from a mother who says, one of my grandchildren is going to be married, but one of my children has said that if his brother is going to be at the wedding, he's not going to come. I mean, that happens too often. And I'm letting into a psychological secret. When you're very angry at someone, and you feel you have good reason for being angry, you may be wrong. Right? Because see, what happens is this. In our mind is a tremendous, tremendous instrument. I don't know if you're familiar with a computer. By now, most people are. There's a hard drive in the computer on which everything that you registers. There's the unconscious part of our mind. That part of our mind over which we have no control. Well, right now we're sitting and thinking, talking, whatever. Okay, that's our conscious mind. But if I were to ask you, so tell me something about what happened at your 8th birthday party. My 8th birthday party. I don't remember anything about your 8th birthday party. If I put you under hypnosis and took you back to when you were 8 years old, you would remember every person who attended there. And I've done that. Why? Because everything that's happened to you from the day that you were born is registered in your unconscious mind. You don't have any access to it, but it's there. So what happens in families especially, brothers and sisters are in frequent relationship to each other, and they can offend one another in one way or another. If someone offends you, maybe when you're 10 years old, that is registered on your computer inside your mind. That is impressed on your unconscious mind. 5 days later, you forget about it. You forget about it, meaning consciously you don't know it, but it's in the unconscious. 3 weeks later, another incident happens. Again, you were offended. Again, that's registered in the unconscious mind. And what happens that the unconscious mind does, it puts similar feelings together. So anytime an incident that causes you to be angry happens, it's in the unconscious mind, and it goes into a little cubicle, right? Collecting all the angry feelings. You don't know about them. You forgot about them. You forgot about them 3 days after they happened. Certainly 3 weeks later. But even the things that you forgot about, they're in your unconscious mind. And anger feelings that are stored up in the unconscious mind are like a collection of dynamite waiting for a spark. And if a spark comes along, it causes a massive explosion. Of what significance is the spark? Nothing. But what happened is they ignited the dynamite. Most of the time, our anger is not because of the current incident, but because the current incident served as a spark to ignite the storage of anger that's been going on in our minds for years and years. So when you really feel good and angry at someone, and you think you're justified, stop and think. I may not be. I know I was offended, and I know what he said hurt me, or what he did to me hurt me. But then that may not be really the reason for my anger. And I'm going to react to him now on the basis of what happened for the past 30, 40 years? Ridiculous. With that kind of awareness, we can become masters of our feelings of anger. So, building unity. Now, the Rebbe in the Tanya points out something very interesting. It says that when Hashem created man, "Vayipach be'apav nishmat ruach hayim," Hashem breathed into us a neshama. Right? The neshama that we have is part of Hashem, part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself. Right? Now, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Hashem echad, Yishmo echad. Right? He can't be cut into parts. Right? All neshamas are one. All of our neshamas are Hashem. Well, what makes us separate? Well, this neshama is in a goof, in a physical goof, and the physical goof is separate. My goof is over here, It stops over here. Your goof is over there, right? Meaning, our neshamas are one. Right? Our bodies are different. Now, you know that we are comprised of a goof and a neshama. What do we give greatest importance to? If we give greatest importance to the goof and to the material parts of life, then we are emphasizing that part of us that sets us apart from another, that separates us. Right? If we minimize our material life and put greatest emphasis on the neshama, then we are emphasizing that part of us which brings us together. So the Alter Rebbe in Tanya makes it very clear that true unity can come only as a result of our minimizing our gashmius, our physicality, and emphasizing our avodas Hashem, our ruchnius. And so, by midot, this is what we do. This is what we achieve. And so we come from Pesach, where we have Azman Chayotenu, being free of our animal drives. And we come to Shavuot, which is the Yom HaBikurim, which is the day of expressing our gratitude and appreciation to others. And if we have those two guides, right, then we can have what occurred at Sinai, where it was Yichan Sham Yisrael b'lev echad ke'ish echad, that everybody was like unified like one person. And of course, during the time of Sfira, between those two periods of Pesach and Shavuot, there were great scholars, right, who did not pay attention to their midot and were not considerate of one another, and we observed a period of mourning to remember that. What are the greatest nisim of Pesach? The Esamakers, the Yamsuf, there's a greater miracle than all of them. Hashem took out a people that had been enslaved and dehumanized, for 100 years. Yeah. And within 7 weeks, he brought them to a status of Nasa v'Nishma, of achieving the Ruchnias, the spirituality of Malachim. That's the greatest miracle of all. And that's the miracle that we have to be able to observe. So, if you come to think of it, you knew everything that I said tonight. I didn't tell you anything new, except maybe a little psychology of the unconscious. But otherwise, everything that I told you is clear to you. All we've got to do is implement it. And how we relate to one another with respect and consideration of thinking what the other person needs and what the other person was, and especially if that other person is one of our family. And especially if the other person is our husband or wife. If we have those kind of midot, right, then we will have celebrated a proper Zman Chayotenu, and we will have celebrate a proper Zman Matan Torahenu, and a proper Yom HaBikurim. And Hashem should give you all a very healthy and happy summer. If there are any questions that you want to raise now, I'll be glad to try and address them. But I do want to say that after the question period is over, I do have to leave immediately, and I won't have an opportunity to shake hands with individuals. Yes, sir?
Could the Rav give us advice when we are the object of anger? Somebody else is spewing anger at us. What would be our best...
Talk about how we should control our anger. What about how the other person reacts toward us? I can only tell you what I learned from my father. Like any Rav, every Rav in history has had opposition. And every Rav has had people who made him miserable and provoked him. Right? And my father was no exception. And sometimes when something happened and somebody provoked my father would say, you know, what he did was so foolish, but he doesn't understand that his behavior was foolish. Right? So I have to have rachmanas on him. I have to feel sorry for him that he's such a tippish, that he's such a fool. You know, when I feel sorry for somebody, I can't be angry at him. Now, it takes a madrege to be able to realize that. And to realize, my mother used to say, the heilige al todin. Pirkei Avos says, al todin es chaveira tagia l'koimah. Don't ever judge another person until you're in his position. How many times have we done something and then later regret it, right? But the circumstances at the time may cause us to do it. And when somebody offends us, we don't know where he's coming from. We don't know what kind of things may have happened. So I think that these kinds of ideas should help us give the person the benefit of the doubt. And I know it's difficult, and the Mitzvah says that's asking what you're asking of a malach. Right? But the Torah asks it of us. By the way, I do want to acknowledge a dear friend of mine who just came in, a friend of mine way back when, Dr. Murray Kaur. Dr. Kaur is a very learned pediatrician who has contributed to Torah literature by translating and explaining the most difficult sforim of the Maral Prague. So glad to see you here, Murray. Listen.
Does our work on our midot need to be positive and translate into love for other Jews and other people in general? Or does it have to be more focused on tolerance in order to reach the ultimate level of unity?
Not that there's a difference. The question is, does our avodah have to be more tolerant or more impressing other Jews? The Torah says, and we say it in Tishmei Yohavtos Hashem Elokecha. What does that mean? You should love Hashem. The Gemara says it means something else also. You should behave in a way that other people will love Hashem. Because if they see that you are a person who observes Torah, and they see that you behave with fine midot, what will they say? Oh, Torah is wonderful. But if we don't behave that way, then unfortunately we are causing a disrespect for Hashem. So yes, I think we have to behave in a way that others will be able to learn from our midot. Yes, sir.
What did the Rav advise to the woman, the grandmother, who asked if one son comes to the wedding, then his brother will not come? What possible advice could the Rav give?
What do I say to the mother? What can I say to anybody who feels hurt? Look, if I have the opportunity to talk with her, I may try to impress her to not behave so foolishly. But I usually don't have that opportunity. And what can I do to try and help her feelings? Very, very difficult. I could just say that I feel with you and I share your agony. Right? But I wish that I had a magic wand to relieve people's misery.
If a person really had something legitimate, someone who really did something wrong to them, is there a place to go and say, listen, Sam, I must have misunderstood. I'm really hurt, and this is what you did that hurt me. Come out straight with it and try to talk it out.
There's a mitzvah that you should give reproof to someone who has acted improperly, right? And it's perfectly legitimate to go over to the person and say, you know, I don't know if you're aware of it, right? But what you said or what you did hurt me deeply. Now, that person may react properly, or he may be a very coarse person and react rudely. But I think it's perfectly legitimate to tell the person, I want you to know. Sometimes the person isn't even aware of how badly they hurt us. Right? And I think that we tell them, and it gives an opportunity. No, it's very interesting. Rabbi Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld, Rabbi Yerushalayim, had a din Torah. And there were two opposing sides. And he gave out a psak din that side A won, and it was a kind of triumph, the zakat, and the other ones lost. Well, the ones that lost at the Torah reacted very rudely. They got up and they insulted and they cursed them, and there was the most horrible expressions. This was a few weeks before Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. So Rabbi Yosef Chaim got up and he said, I want you to listen to me. I gave out the psak din to the best of my ability. I can only give a psak halacha according to what I see. Now, if I was wrong, I can ask Hashem to be merciful. I tried my best. But if I was right, and you are insulting me, and defying the psak din of Torah, then I wish you a kasida v'chasida Torah. Someone who was around said to them, look, I understand you wanted to be mindful, but you had to go to that degree. So he says, I'll tell you why I did that. He says, you know, we're only a few weeks away from Yom Kippur. He says, you have to understand human psychology. See, when this comes around to Erev Yom Kippur, and the person starts making a cheshbon nefesh, starts thinking a little bit about what he did, right? He may try to feel bad about what he did, but instead of admitting it, he'll try to defend himself. Right? And he will never get a kaporas avodos. By telling him that I'm mochel him, right, I'm giving him an opportunity that when he reflects back on this event, right, that he'll be able to realize that he did wrong. Right? So here was somebody, a great person who was publicly insulted, right? And he reacted in a way that was constructive. Right? Again, there are shvarim on the lives of our tzaddikim, and I think that if we learn and we learn how they live, they should be our models for ourselves. Thank you, everybody, for listening. And